The best way to learn a language? Immersion, living where the language is spoken and using it every day. But if that's not in the cards for you this year, you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel. Be a better you in 2024 with Babbel, the science-backed language learning app that actually works. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Babbel's tips and tools are approachable, accessible, rooted in real-life situations, and delivered with conversation-based teaching so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. For instance, I've been using Babbel's convenient courses to help me learn basic conversational skills in German while I'm getting ready for a little trip I'm planning. It's not a language I'd ever studied before, but I find the lessons really easy and kind of like hand-holding me through learning a completely new language to me. And it's reassuring to know that with the help of Babbel, I'll be able to greet people, order food, and ask for directions without having to consult language apps while I'm in Deutschland. I'm still learning. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold. Plus, all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/vulgar. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/vulgar, spelled BABBEL.com/vulgar. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Your teen requested a ride, but this time not from you. It's through their Uber teen account. You drive your teenager around, a lot, to their friend Jacob's house, their other friend Jake's house, to James's, to Jaden's, to Jalen's, to...
Mom? This is Jake's house, not Jacob's.
Now with an Uber teen account, your teen can request a ride under your supervision. They'll ride with a highly rated driver, and with live trip tracking, you'll follow along the whole ride to their friends' houses that all sound the same. Add your teen to your Uber account today. See app for details.
Bye, Mom.
Hello, and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. And this is season 7, part 2. Meanwhile, back in France. Part 1 was mostly focused on America and kind of what was going on there. Oh, I should also say, my name is Anne Foster, and this season is How Do You Solve a Problem Like Marie Antoinette? And we're getting closer to Marie Antoinette, which is what I want to say. Like, this is a long journey to get towards her, but there's so much going on in the world where she was that affected her, even though she wasn't directly involved in it. I just really want to set the scene. And in this part of the series, we're going to be looking at France and what was going on in France. And that's not something I know a lot about, let alone how to pronounce the words, which is why I brought on a guest expert. It's Amanda Matta. Welcome, Amanda.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
So listeners, you may know Amanda Matta. She is a content creator. She is a royal commentator. She also hosts the Art of History podcast. And I think we will clarify, you're not a historian. What your background in is French and art history.
No. Well, yes, I have a French, language background. I studied abroad there. But yeah, art history is my professional wheelhouse. I've kind of catapulted myself from my art history background into royal commentary. So that's just because I got a lot of books on the royals, essentially. I love reading about the royals, and it's been an interest of mine since teenagehood. So I'm very flattered you say expert, but I do take a special interest in the French monarchy for sure.
And in French mistresses, do you want to tell everybody what you just told me before we recorded? You have a long interest in this.
Yeah, I do. When I was in high school, I took a French art and history course, which is kind of where it all began. And one of our papers, we could write about anything French history related. It had to be in French. And for some reason, 16, 17-year-old me chose to write about French royal mistresses. And this is because I had a fabulous teacher, Madame Crawford. who like encouraged even these interests in like very licentious topics for teenagers. But I remember I wrote it and I printed it on teal paper because it was left over from my Sweet 16 party, which had like a turquoise and teal theme. So I still remember what that paper looked like. I wrote about pretty much everything we're about to talk about today. So I've built on that knowledge, obviously, over the years, but this has always been like one of my favorite royal history stories to get into.
And when we were talking about having you on the podcast, like I knew that this is like French history and like the Marie Antoinette era. I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, is like for you what like Mary Queen of Scots and the Tudor era is for me. Like I feel like this is just your comfort history era.
Absolutely. It's the first royal story that I really delved into and just was, like you said, I was just instantly comfortable there. Like the Marie Antoinette, The Journey book, by Antonia Fraser, stole it off of my mom's bookshelf when I was like 16, 17 and watched the Sofia Coppola Marie Antoinette movie. And like when I got to the point where I could look back at that movie and be like, oh, this is actually like pretty accurate. You know, you get a good sense of life at Versailles. Like that was just, I knew this was going to be like my wheelhouse forever. So yeah, very happy to be in this area again today.
And so I am a newcomer to this area. And so, but that's part of what this whole season is about. Like we're getting, Marie Antoinette is sort of like the patron saint of the season, but it's just like everything that's like swirling around. I think of it like the layers of like an onion, like we're just getting closer and closer to Marie Antoinette herself, because I think it would be doing a disservice to her to just be like, oh, here's her life story, where it's like, well, what was happening in the world? Like that gets so involved.
No, I agree with you. Yeah, she'll be in this story today. I agree that it's useful to have that like background, like the world building that helps you approach Marie Antoinette, because to a lot of people, she is just like the bitch who said, let them eat cake. And that's not true at all. And it takes a little bit more nuance to kind of acknowledge that. So building up to her, I think, is the way to go.
Good, because that's what we're going to be doing for a very long time on this podcast. I'm not going to tell anybody. I have long-term plans for this podcast, and we're not going to get to a Marie Antoinette episode for quite a while. But she's in today's story.
Yeah, she is.
What we're establishing here is really just kind of like what the French royal court was like, because that is where Marie Antoinette was placed when she was a young teenager, marrying into this family. And again, this is why I'm so grateful to have you here, because you can explain that whole thing. This is a big question, but like, can you explain Versailles?
What was Versailles? Yeah. So Versailles, it's so much more, honestly, than just a palace in France. It started out as this hunting lodge. It was not to palace standards. It was not glitzy and glamorous as we know it today. It was built, I think, originally under Louis the 13th in the 1600s, and it got expanded over the years. It had a good location outside of the city of Paris proper. And it was Louis the 14th, the Sun King, who kind of decided to elevate Versailles to be, it really became the nucleus of absolute monarchy in France. And this is obviously, it's not a Louis the 14th podcast, but his childhood, you learn so much about like his motivations when you kind of get into the things that happened to him as a kid. There were all these civil wars going on in France. I think he was kidnapped as a very young child, became king at a very young age, and he kind of held a grudge against the monarchy and his ministers and the courtiers for his whole life. So as he becomes king, he's coming into his power. He wants a way to centralize them and to keep his eye on them. So what he does is he takes Versailles, he builds it up into this huge, huge palace, which becomes not just the seat of his royal power and authority, but also he forces basically the royal court to move to Versailles. And that's basically so he can keep an eye on everybody. So to do that, he has to make it bigger, better than it ever has been. He hires prominent architects of the age to kind of beef it up, expand the hunting lodge into, Yeah, the palace we know today. He adds these wings on either side. He adds the gardens. Over time, you get things like the Hall of Mirrors. If you've ever been to Versailles, like that is one of the most breathtaking places to stand, I think, in the entire
That's
world.
I think this is my fun fact, that there's so many movies that ask to film in Versailles, and that's like one of 2 rooms that anyone's ever allowed to film. And it's like the Hall of Mirrors is like, that's the room they let you in.
Because it's huge. First of all, there's a lot of room to get cameras in there. A lot of Versailles is actually kind of cramped and small. There aren't a lot of hallways, and this had to do with like the way that the court life at Versailles was structured. The whole point of Versailles was to showcase the power of the king, the monarch, and the way that the palace is actually physically built and physically laid out just reinforces that. Basically, it's designed around the king's bedchamber, which is like the most powerful place in the palace, because that's obviously where the king spends his time. He is waking up, going to bed there. And around that room, you have the king's apartment, which is just this series of rooms that get smaller and smaller and more intimate the farther you go. And ultimately, you reach the king's bedchamber. And this sounds like it wouldn't be important, but it is. So much thought was put into this. Because Louis XIV, he's supposed to be the Sun King. He's the person that everybody gets authority from. He's the source of all light in the French monarchy. That's how he built himself up. His rooms are laid out from east to west, like on that axis of the rising and setting sun. Very, very purposefully. So as you go deeper into these rooms, access would be restricted. You had to be in the king's inner circle the farther you got into the Palace of Versailles. So it's physically laid out to reinforce the king's authority.
And isn't there something about, like you mentioned, that he wanted to have everybody at Versailles so he could keep an eye on them? And isn't there something like, and he wanted to keep them too busy to scheme against him, so he like made them all, there's something about fashion or like the things that he made them do, he just like kept them busy with like busy work, right?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Kind of like how cults today operate. They keep you too busy and tired with manual labor or weird rituals so that you can't think about what's going on and like potentially escape. That's what Louis XIV did at Versailles. He developed this code of etiquette, which again, if I'm going to reference the Sofia Coppola Marie Antoinette movie, probably too much during this episode, but if you remember,
totally fine. That's most of what I know. Yeah.
Well, if you remember in that movie, there's the Comtesse de Noailles, who is like her lady in waiting type person. And she looks at Marie Antoinette at some point and she goes, "This, madame, is Versailles." And like, that's because Versailles had its own code of etiquette that everyone had to follow. You're exactly right. It was everything from how you dressed to how you bowed and curtsied to how you addressed people to how you walked. Like there was a specific walk that women did at Versailles. And so, yeah, it was to keep people constantly thinking about, not just how to operate, but like status and rank dictated everything. It dictated, like I said, how far you could get into the palace, dictated who you would speak to, who would be introduced first, just to keep people busy and to keep all the attention focused on the king. He was the source of all goodness in this life. All favor came from the king. Obviously, there was like some political scheming that still happened, but it was all basically centered around how to get access to the king and how to get in the king's good graces. So that was the system Louis XIV set up, and it lasted until the French Revolution, but it also hastened the French Revolution because from the outside, this system is completely bonkers. The public was allowed at Versailles. You had to be dressed a certain way to get in, but it was, to the outside world, kind of an amusement park. You could go and watch the king eat dinner. Like you could just stand there and stare at him. Courtiers who were in Versailles could be there when he woke up. That was a ceremony, his levee. They could be there when he went to sleep. They could be there for his toilette when he was getting powdered and wigs were getting put on. Everything was ritualized at Versailles, and it was to reinforce that hierarchy structure. And
I think this is a great, well, it leads me to this question. So if you're saying like only the most elite can get close to the king, like, at this room, it's like, okay, these people drop off. And at this room, these people drop off until eventually it's just a few people. So, which leads me to the position of the royal mistress is the person who's with him all the time. So can you explain that situation?
Yeah. So yeah, the court structure, it is based around getting access to the king. Courtiers are required to be present, but like you said, like the access gets restricted the closer to him you get. But the mistress in France especially is this, it's quasi-official of a position at court. It's not written in the books, but everyone knows that this is almost like a job that is open, and it's a court position that again is centered around influencing the king. But the king himself could pick these mistresses. Obviously, it wasn't a job you applied for. The king had to take an interest in you, and I think I always find it interesting talking about royal mistresses just from a human perspective, because royal marriages, were often political. They were for alliances or money or all these reasons aside from love. And kings are still people too. They still want affection. So they're looking for a person, if it's not their wife, they're looking for a person who can give them that affection, who can flatter them, they can have a close relationship with. So that's kind of where the role of royal mistress starts. But in the Middle Ages, it does sort of get elevated to this political position and this court position, like an official job. In France, it's called the maîtresse en titre, the official mistress, or the maîtresse, the titled mistress. It kind of emerges with Agnes Sorel in the Middle Ages, and then under, I think it's Henry II with Diane de Poitiers. They're some of the first official mistresses, but under Louis XIV at Versailles, it becomes this like regimented role where there are certain expectations. You do get specific apartments at the palace, right above the king's, with a staircase leading into his bedchamber. And people knew that they could go to you to petition the king. They knew that you had an ear of the king, and he would listen to you. And ostensibly, the mistress had the king's best interest at heart. So, there is all this maneuvering around her to get on her good side. So it's a position that everyone knows that you're sleeping with the king, but they have to respect you anyway, which is just, it's fabulous to be the power behind the throne in that way.
Well, I feel like at Versailles, a lot of people were sleeping with a lot of people, like just in terms of the culture. What I have ascertained, like I read a biography of the person we're going to talk about today, Madame du Barry, by Joan Haslip. And it just seems like the casualness of sex in French, like aristocratic, noble, that's just kind of like everyone, like you have your spouse, like you're married, you have a husband or wife, but then also you're the mistress of whoever. Like sex was treated differently in this court than in other royal courts, it seems like.
Yeah, it was, I think, like in England, you had official mistresses. You had an Anne Boleyn from time to time who essentially everyone knows, but there is still like this stigma associated with being a mistress in that context, especially if the woman is not married. But yeah, in France, it's kind of everybody has their lover, and it's well documented who was sleeping with who. Women in France, especially royal women, could also take lovers, but it was never as ritualized as the king taking a mistress, right? And if things went south, there was a higher price to be paid if you were a woman who had looked elsewhere for companionship. But yeah, the position of mistress, there's like a Wikipedia page for French royal mistresses, and you can scroll through, and they have them divided by reign, because kings would take multiple mistresses throughout their lives. Louis XIV and Louis XV each had, I think, at least 5 or 6. And Louis XV, who is the guy we're going to be talking about most today, he had 2 very famous mistresses, the first being Madame de Pompadour. And she was unique because at a certain point, she and the king like stopped sleeping together, but she remained his favorite person. She still controlled a lot of access to him. So as much as these relationships usually were sexual in nature, there is still room for a lot of like mutual respect between an official mistress and the king. There's still, I mean, Madame de Pompadour was a major patron of like the Enlightenment philosophers. She flattered the king. She made him comfortable, but she also, she dictated a lot of court etiquette, a lot of fashions, a lot of art. And it's a job where I don't know. There's just a lot of moving pieces with it. There's a lot of stuff just like piled onto a royal mistress.
In addition to the royal mistress, though, and so one of the reasons why I've avoided learning about French history until now is because the Louis of it all,
Yeah.
I find them confusing that they're all called Louis. But there was the Sun King, he was number 14. Then his heir is number 15, who we're talking about this time. And then number 16 is Marie Antoinette's husband. So there's really just 3 Louis to think about today. But so number 15, what don't people call him, like Louis Quinze? I don't know. People, is that 15 in French?
Yes, it is. Kansas 15, 14 is 14. 15 is interesting because he kind of inherits this court from his, I'm pretty sure it's his father, Louis the 14th. 16 and 15 were grandson and grandfather. They weren't father and son. But yeah, 15 inherits the court of Versailles, the system of Versailles, but I think he feels very stifled by it. It's not a system he's set up, but this is what France is doing now, the absolute monarchy thing, the etiquette thing. So when he takes royal mistresses, I think it's to escape from court life. It's a way of living his authentic self, of actually finding joy in being the king. And with Madame de Pompadour especially, she was somebody who was, like I said, his close companion. They stopped sleeping together a couple years before her death, but she was his mistress for close to 20 years. So that was a position that, like, it's very hard to follow up on after somebody's been the king's companion for that long. Yeah, I don't know. 14 and 15, I think, there's an interesting contrast there, which we'll get to, I'm sure. But 15 especially, I think he's poised to resent the courtly etiquette system in a way that 14, who set it all up, just kind of thrived in it.
Can you talk about the Deer Park, which was like 15's little brothel house he had? Or do you know about that?
Yeah, I don't know a ton about it.
It's something, here's what I recall reading when I was reading this biography, it was sort of like, it was a house where it wasn't someone who's going to be the official mistress, but it's just someone he wants to sleep with. And she would just kind of like live in that house until he got tired of her, and then she would leave, but he would give her like a pension for life and she was fine. So there was sort of like, not like the mistress, but just kind of like other women that he liked to see.
Yeah, there is this other, it's like a roster of women. They weren't the maîtresse en titre, they were called the petite mistress, like the little mistress, the minor mistress. They weren't going to wield any political influence. They were purely there for the king to get away and to have some companionship, especially in Louis XV's case, to kind of feel alive. As he gets older, he talks about, to his advisors, very openly, he talks about needing sexual stimulation to like feel alive. He was very hot-blooded, and this seems to be a dynastic thing with the Bourbons. All the men are just kind of rakish and licentious, and they love having sex. Louis XV, it's documented several times a day, he's looking for a way to, slip away, whether it's with his official mistress or to the Deer Park. And Madame de Pompadour is by his side for 20 years. Eventually, they call her frigid in the historical record. Most scholars agree today she kind of had some health issues, maybe including vaginal infections. So that's why they stopped sleeping together. But even after that point, she is helping oversee the Deer Park, and she is kind of supervising what goes on there, who is in the roster, who's sitting on the bench for the king to choose from. So she wields influence not just politically over the court life, but also, like, again, who can get access to the king? Who is he spending his time with? Who is getting to whisper into his ear?
And so you've beautifully set everything up to understand the Versailles deal, what's up with the mistresses, and now we're going to backtrack because we're talking about who the next mistress is going to be after Madame de Pompadour, but her beginnings might surprise you. And actually, first I want to see if we can agree on who we're going to imagine, because so the woman who becomes Madame du Barry, so her name is Jean Bessu. Is that how you would say that?
I've heard both. I've heard Bessu and Becu. I like Besu. I think that's the more accurate pronunciation.
We'll go with Besu. And so the thing about her is she is the most hot person anyone has ever seen.
She's dazzling.
She's like, when you read about just from childhood through to, like, there's moments in this where she's just a person standing in a crowd of hundreds and someone is like, who's that hot person? Like,
Yeah.
and in Versailles, a place where everybody's like styled and like the dresses are amazing and the makeup and the hair. Like, I'm thinking, if you think about like a Hollywood red carpet situation, it's like everyone looks the best they could possibly look, hair, makeup, dresses. But who's the one person where everyone's like, oh my God? So I'm picturing Angelina Jolie personally, just because she's got such a startling, surreal level of beauty. But who do you imagine when you think of her?
I have been thinking honestly of Blake Lively, and I think that's just because of where we are in the Hollywood news cycle. But because Madame du Barry, as she will come to be known, is always described as golden haired, as, you know, fair skinned, as dazzling, that's where I go, because the Sofia Coppola movie characterizes Madame du Barry very well with their casting, with Asia Argento, who is stunning, but she's very like Angelina Jolie. Usually has dark hair, but she's got this black hair in the movie. She's very like mysterious and swarthy. In reality, Jean Besu is always described as, you know, golden haired, just the prettiest smile you've ever seen in your life. She's very fair. She's got these bright eyes. So like appearance wise, I usually go for like a Blake Lively, or I don't know who else is in that, like the blonde bombshell.
Okay, I'm going to suggest Sydney Sweeney because
yeah, maybe.
the more so Madame Tussaud, who I'm going to do an episode about later.
Yeah.
I think the person who taught her how to do waxworks did a waxwork of Madame du Barry. And then there's a recreation of it that you can see. And it kind of looks like Sydney Sweeney. But also when they describe her eyes, there's something about her like eyelids. Her eyes are always kind of like in a Marilyn Monroe-esque way, sort of half closed all the time.
Bedroom eyes.
In a way that people... Yeah. So, and Sydney Sweeney kind of has that as well. And also she apparently has amazing breasts, which Sydney Sweeney is famous for too. So she's got this sort of like astonishing beauty that makes everybody like a superpower. Like, it's really interesting when I was reading through this book, like the way that people just see her and they're just like, what? Like, I don't know if I've ever read about someone in history who's like this gorgeous.
Yeah. Whatever it is, she's got it. You know, she has this magnetism about her from a young age, even before she has any wealth and status, because spoiler alert, she grows up very poor. People are just, gravitating towards her. And she seems to be able to embrace her natural charms, is what everybody refers to it as. Her natural charms, her natural beauty, her charisma, to get what she wants and to elevate herself in the world. So yeah, she just has this quality, this je ne sais quoi, since we're talking about the French, that it's with her for her entire life.
And then also when she gets to her Versailles era, like they talk about everyone there is wearing like so much makeup and wigs and stuff, but she comes out with like natural hair, very clean face. Like it's this girl next door type vibe is what she's bringing.
And she also, you wouldn't think this would necessarily put someone ahead of the pack, but she bathed several times a week. Whereas most courtiers at Versailles, this is a place, I didn't mention this, thousands of people are living at Versailles. It is cramped. It is stinky. They're using chamber pots. And it's not, some people will tell you in a very sensational sort of way that people were like pissing on the floor of Versailles, like just openly. It wasn't to that level, but it was gross and it did smell bad. People were carrying around little scented sachets with them or little bouquets. There was special perfume used to scent Versailles to cover the stink of thousands of people living in close quarters. Jean Besu develops this habit of bathing at least 3 or 4 times a week in rose-scented water. So her self-care routine, I would love to get a rundown of that, because she's taking care of herself. She's making sure she always not just smells good, but is actually clean, which is an advantage in the court of Versailles for sure.
Mm-hmm. So she comes by her hotness through several generations of hot people who elevated themselves through hotness. So her grandfather was named Fabien Bessou. He was a cook in Paris. And this, for reference, I'm looking at, it's this essay from Women in World History by David S. Newhall. And he says, he was a handsome cook in Paris who somehow persuaded a noblewoman to marry him. Through his hotness is how he did that. Through his man version of having je ne sais quoi. She soon ran out of money and died. And then he had a second marriage to a chambermaid. And the chambermaid was working nearby for an exiled mistress of Louis XIV. Anyway, so hot grandfather has children with his presumably hot chambermaid, second wife. One of those children is Anne Bessou, who is Jean's mother. And they were all hot. They were all gorgeous.
Yeah.
Including Anne. She became a seamstress.
She's so hot, she allegedly seduces a monk. Like, that's next level hotness. Even in France, even in France.
Yeah, but I want to say the monk was also hot. So I'm picturing like Glenn Powell is a monk.
Oh, mm-hmm.
So the monk is called Brother Angel.
Yeah, Frère Ange. Yeah.
Frère Ange. Anyway, he was later dismissed from his order.
Because he was too hot.
For hotness. Anyway, he became a popular preacher due to his hotness. Anyway, so she seduced him. It's pretty much understood that this is the father of Jean. Like, he appeared in several father-like roles, like at her wedding and things like that.
I wanted to say that when Jean is born, isn't she born in the same village as Joan of Arc, which I just find so fascinating, in Vaucouleurs? Yes. What is in the water in this village producing these magnetic people?
Oh, absolutely. Like, that's what you want to bottle and sell, frankly. So Anne she was unmarried, 30 years old. She has a daughter who is called Jeanne. I assume the baby was born and everyone's like, mon Dieu, because it's like the most gorgeous baby anyone's ever seen, presumably. Mm-hmm. Then she moves to Paris. Like, she can't, she doesn't marry the hot monk because he is still a monk at this point. But she's just like this beautiful woman. She has this gorgeous child. Like, there's just a lot of gorgeous blondness happening. Eventually, Anne marries a servant. We assume he's hot. Actually, at this point, maybe not. I don't know. He was set up as a munitions storekeeper for Corsica. So the story isn't going to have a lot of war stuff going on, but just bear in mind, like, there's constantly war going on.
And machinations to elevate people through war. And depending on which side you take, you can kind of get ahead because of that.
And now for a quick advertising break.
As a podcast network, our first priority has always been audio and the stories we're able to share with you. But at Realm, we also sell some pretty cool merch, and organizing that was made both possible and easy with Shopify. When you think about successful businesses like Aloe or Allbirds or Skims, an often overlooked secret is the business behind the business that makes selling and, for shoppers, buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. That's because nobody does selling better than Shopify. It's the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret that's definitely worth talking about is that Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%. That's more happy customers and way more sales going. If you're hoping to grow your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more, sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/realm to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/realm.
This episode is brought to you by Atlassian. Atlassian makes the team collaboration software that powers enterprise businesses around the world, including over 80% of the Fortune 500. With Atlassian's AI-powered software like Jira, Confluence, and Loom, you'll have more time to do the work that matters. In fact, Atlassian customers experience a 25% reduction in project duration per year. Unleash the potential of your team at Atlassian.com. Atlassian.
The Volvo XC60 plug-in hybrid is about performance. not just on the road, but in life. With not only trunk space, but room to make memories. It's electric, with a backup plan, where the only speed that matters is how fast you can slow down. The Volvo XC60 plug-in hybrid. Performance where it matters the most. Visit volvocars.com/US to learn more.
Have you ever wondered what it's like to bite into Nerds gummy clusters? They're fruity. They're tangy. They're gummy. And they're crunchy. Nerds Gummy Clusters, a union of fruity sweet gummy and tangy crunchy nerds. Unleash your senses. Shop now at nerdscandy.com.
And we're back. Okay, so let me see. So Anne marries this guy, this munitions storekeeper, but his boss is named Biard de Monceau, and he took an interest in young Jean. Not a gross interest.
Yeah, I think it's just because, again, that magnetism in France at this time, there's this recognition that if you have charms, like, you can elevate yourself. The French aristocracy, I don't think it's as closed to outsiders as it is in, say, England, where everybody knows their role, everybody knows their place, and titles are this very, like, definitive thing. The French nobility is a lot more nebulous. People are changing their names to suit themselves. Like, I think there was even mention in Jean's biography that her grandfather, like, took the name of his noblewoman wife, which normally you can't do. Like, men cannot take their wives' titles for themselves, but Jean's grandfather did because it would work for him, right? So there's a lot of fluidity. So I think there is this understanding that if you are beautiful and charming, with the right luck and the right placement, you can go far in the world.
Yeah, so he's one of the first people to maybe see. And so the reason why he's seeing her is because her mom is like, they're living in this household as servants, basically. Her mom is a seamstress, and then her stepfather is this, like, munitions guy. Anyway, so Biard de Monceau had a mistress named Francesca, who was a courtesan and actress, who is AKA Madame Frederique. And so this is crucial because this imprints on young Jean. Like, she's a young girl and she's living in this house. Through Francesca, she sees just the glamour that a gorgeous woman could potentially have. Like, seeing what it's like to live as, like, the mistress of a really rich person. So this imprints on her.
Yeah.
And then she's sent off to convent school, where she lived for 8 or 9 years. But this is where she develops a love of reading, and maybe she has a really exquisite taste. Like, her art taste is really, really good. She's got great taste, and this might be where she starts learning about that stuff. But basically, she goes off to convent school, she learns some stuff, and she graduates or whatever. She leaves when she's 15 years old. But what she remembers is Francesca's life, and, like, that's what she wants. She wants nice things. Would you agree? This is one of her driving forces. She wants nice things. She wants the gowns. She wants the perfumes.
Yeah, she just wants life to be beautiful. Yeah, I think when she's in the convent school, it's this interesting dichotomy where she is, I think, genuinely religious, because a lot of people were at that time and they believe in God and a higher power. But she, also recognizes the earthly virtues that you can attain if you play your cards right. So I think she does want this comfortable life. Also, there aren't a lot of options for young, poor women at this time if you wanted to have a comfortable life. Like, you could either go into service, you could be a shop girl, you could be a domestic servant, or you could be a courtesan. A lot of people will throw around the term prostitute with Dubarry, as she is later known, but I don't think that's ever the route she's planning on taking. It is this world where if sex is your currency, if your physical attributes are what you have to offer, what you're getting in reward is not financial money. Like, it sometimes is gifts, but, like, the status and the comfort are the main goals, it seems like.
Yeah, it's oldie-timey, like, courtesan relationships. are
Yeah.
most similar today to what maybe like a sugar daddy relationship. It's like someone is like bankrolling your glamorous life. Someone is paying for you to have a place to live. They're paying for you to go on a private jet. They're paying for your clothes. It's not, you're not a streetwalker. Like it's,
You have a patron, you have a protector. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So then she got apprenticed Jean to a hairdresser. And this is, I like this note. In the essay, it says the incredibly elaborate coiffeurs of that time made hairdressing a well-paying art. And if you think about like when you picture, she's not in the story yet, but like the Marie Antoinette thing, it's like, oh, you have this giant wig and it's shaped like a ship. Like, or like think about like Bridgerton.
Oh, yeah, where there's like a music box for some reason in Queen Charlotte's hair, even though the mechanics of that weren't quite invented yet.
Yeah, exactly. But think about Queen Charlotte in Bridgerton. Like, yeah, of course, like hairdressers are going to be getting paid a lot of money. And she's also artistic, you know, she's skilled, so she does this. Anyway, she is 15 years old, began an affair with the hairdresser. His mother, alarmed at his spending on her.
Which I love.
Yeah, no, like I don't know, like her vibe is just, what's the Ariana Grande song? Like, I see it, I like it, I want it. Like, that's Madame du Barry. Anyway, so then there's the whole thing. They go to court. The hairdresser leaves, but it seems like perhaps one of the reasons why this got to a court level is perhaps the 15-year-old Jean had a child by him. Because at the same time, a girl is born whose name is Marie Josephine, but she's called Betsy. And they were like, her father is actually Jean's uncle.
Right.
Don't worry about it. Totally not a teenage person's child.
Yeah.
And apparently Betsy looked a lot like Jean, and they were very close.
Yeah, and Jean would eventually, she would keep in touch with this girl. She would pay for her dowry when Betsy gets married. So it's a very close family relationship. Although it is worth noting that Jean's mother sues the hairdresser's family for defamation, and that's the court case. So they obviously don't want the story to get out there that Jean has borne this child at age 15 or 16. But that is a historical rumor about her, shall we say.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people just kind of accept that's probably true. So then she takes a position as a maid and then companion to the widow of a wealthy man. The widow had 2 middle-aged sons who were attracted to her because she is this like super powered, gorgeous like person. Tensions mounted. And then she was fired. So, you know, it's like the double-edged sword of being incredibly hot is that people are attracted to you, but then sometimes that is a bad thing.
Yeah, sometimes it attracts the attention of the wrong people, including apparently the wife of one of the middle-aged sons of this widow. So I can't imagine the dynamics in that household.
Everybody. Have you ever seen Showgirls?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so I only recently watched it for the first time a couple months ago. And it's a bananas movie, obviously. But so the main character, Nomi Malone, everyone who meets her wants to fuck her. Men, women, every single person. The dynamic of the movie is she's just, so I was just like, oh, that's kind of Madame du Barry. I'm like, oh, this is kind of like Showgirls. Just like, it's almost dangerous, like how hot she is, that everyone is so sexually attracted to her. And she's 15.
Right.
Which is dangerous in a different way. Anyway, so then she emerges the next year, calling herself Mademoiselle Lang, and she becomes a salesgirl/model at the Maison L'Habit, a millinery shop patronized by the aristocracy. Now, this was kind of like oldie times Hooters, is how I describe it, because this millinery shop only hired the most gorgeous young women.
Yeah.
That's what it was known for. That's why people shop there.
Again, this like roster of cute, hot girls. Apparently they were sequestered by the shopkeeper. Am I right?
Yeah. They had to like, they slept there to try and protect them.
Right. But they were allowed to circulate on weekends and walk around Paris, which is where, again, there's this misconception, this rumor that gets spread about Jean because of this position in this millinery, which is a hat shop, very fancy hats, but this hat shop that only employs beautiful, sexy women. There's this misconception about her that that means she was a prostitute and that she was courting the customers in a different way and accepting, a few coins at a time for a couple minutes alone with her. And that, again, there's no real evidence of that. Yes, these women were using their charms to market themselves and draw people into this shop and keep customers happy, but I don't think it was to the level of this is a brothel.
I do want to mention, in other instances, there is a connection between hat shops and sex work in this era. So even if it was just a hat shop, like people are, oh, a hat shop. It's like, no, it's literally a hat shop. Like, but there was this kind of, because I think hat shops often
connotation. Yeah.
Yeah. So she's just working the hat shop. She's obviously the hottest person there. And then she meets Jean-Baptiste, the Comte du Barry. So he was known as Le Rouet. Can you explain what a rouet is?
Yeah, it's kind of think of like a Regency rake. It's a rakish man. It's a libertine. He is schmoozing. He's wining and dining. This guy, du Barry, owns a casino. I think he's a gambler. He's just no good. He's also kind of a pimp. He has, again, this like roster of women that he will pimp out in a high class sort of way, send them around Paris to be courtesans and to bring in wealthy men who in turn will come into his circle and spend money on his casino. So it's just kind of this, he's called utterly unprincipled, a witty talker and expert at duping others, and a champion libertine in a society boasting regiments of that ilk. So he's courting, people without morals who want to live this very ritzy, opulent, hedonistic lifestyle is kind of how he gets characterized.
And he's not a wealthy person, although he's from like an ancient family. So
it's like an impoverished noble family.
Exactly. And so at one point, like a few years earlier, he had tried to pimp out a woman to the king to become the new mistress. But then, which is this number 15, he found out that this woman was connected to this guy and was like, oh my God, that means she might have venereal disease. And so then he said no.
Yeah. At this time, there is an understanding that women can be elevated to the role of royal mistress with the right maneuvering. Normally, though, they come from a noble background or they themselves come from a wealthy family. So this guy, du Barry, trying to pimp out women in his social circle to the king, it's really bold. It's a bold plan. I will give him that. But he knows the rewards will be good if he can get a woman into the king's bedchamber.
Yeah.
That's a great connection to have because it is an official position at court.
And then he goes into the hat shop and he sees Jean and he's just like,
that's the one.
Well, here we go. Like, oh my gosh. Yeah. I want to tell you two stories. Mm-hmm. First is that when I was a child going to elementary school, and I didn't really I don't know, you're just kind of like, these are the people who are in my school. And there was a girl one grade ahead of me. And I was always just like, that's her. Her name was Tanya. And I was just like, there's something weird about her. Like, she looks weird. Like, and it's just like, okay, that's just weird looking Tanya. And then in high school, she became a model. And I realized, oh, she's beautiful.
That's what it was.
That's what was weird. Like, she looked different from everybody else. And I was like, Tanya just looks weird. I guess that's just what she looks like. And then I'm like, oh, no, that's beauty. she's actually incredibly attractive.
Yeah.
But it's like, when someone is so beautiful, it can be this is like in Sister to the Traveling Pants. Lena's character says this, but it's like people stare at you like you're a freak of nature when you're so beautiful.
Yeah, people can resent you for that too.
Yeah, I just truly, like as a child, I didn't understand she was beautiful. I was just like, there's something different about her. She looks weird. Like, not negative, but just like she looks weird. My second story is I was once in an elevator with Annie Murphy from Schitt's Creek.
Oh.
Who in person is so startling looking. Like on Schitt's Creek, like she's obviously a beautiful person. Right. But when I saw her in the elevator, I was just like, oh, this is what you look like in real life. And it's like her eyes were like so big and so far apart from each other. So it's like, those are my two examples of being in the presence of an extremely beautiful person. And both times I was like, oh, this is weird.
Yeah. Or like, do you ever have friends like that you're like, how am I in the same circle as you? Because you're just a goddess. You are so beautiful. Why are you even talking to me? And I love you so much. Like, yeah, some people just bring that out in you.
Yeah, some people. So it's like this extreme. I just find it really interesting that Jean was like so gorgeous that it just like affects like everyone who interacts with her is just stares. I'm
Yeah.
picturing like there's some people you watch in movies where you're just like, how is that? Like Lupita Nyong'o. It's just like I could just stare at you forever. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Gemma Chan is one for me. Like in the Mary Queen of Scots movie, I just couldn't focus on anyone else when she was on the screen.
Or Simone Ashley when she showed up in Bridgerton, I was just like, well,
Hello.
this is the
Yeah.
most beautiful woman I've ever seen.
But yeah, that's what Jean's using to her advantage. Like other past royal mistresses, because remember, this is an official position. There is kind of a job description and kind of like a profile of the person we're looking for to fill this role of official mistress. With Jean, she doesn't fit the bill. She's beautiful, she's charming, and that's what they're going for. Like that's what they're relying on. Whereas in the past, like I said, it's status, it's wealth, it's connections to a good family, it's being well read in the case of the last royal mistress, Madame de Pompadour, who at this point, when, spoiler alert, Jean is about to meet the king. Madame de Pompadour has been dead for 4 years. It's a very sad story because Louis XV really, I think, did love her and hold her in a lot of esteem. But with Madame de Pompadour, he was getting, this society hostess. He was getting a very, very smart, savvy woman. And even after they stopped sleeping together, he respected her enough to keep her at court. And she still led kind of this household of the official royal mistress. But with Jean, the king is looking for something else. He is in his late 50s. I have a quote here from Eleanor Herman, who has written a great book. It's called Sex with Kings. And it kind of delves into a lot of royal mistresses over the years. And she writes, as an aging monarch trembling before the gates of death, Louis had little need of intelligence. He wanted frequent athletic sex to convince him he was still alive. As he aged, he had difficulty finding women who aroused him until he met the enthusiastic Parisian prostitute he made his final mistress. If it had been a few years earlier, under the firm reign of Madame de Pompadour, Jean would have been a mere fling. So it really is like right place, right time for Jean that she is able to elevate herself to the position of just getting in the same room as the king. And we can talk about how she met him here because I think it's a fun story. But yeah, right place, right time. He's looking for, I picture like a Catherine Howard situation where the king is old.
I was thinking of Catherine Howard exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. He's looking for someone to make him feel alive. And if you've watched The Tudors, it portrays her so well. I forget the actress's name, but I love her. She's so young and she's so full of life. And there's this one scene where they have had sex, but like she goes to sit on a swing or something and she's dancing in the rain and he just sits there and watches her. This is Henry VIII. And you can tell it's just the youthfulness that is like really, really appealing to him. So that's what we're dealing with Louis XV at this point. He is in his late 50s. Jean is about 25 or 26 at this point.
And she's also, I wanted to mention, like, she is gorgeous. And lots of people in Versailles probably were gorgeous. Not as much as her. But she's also so pleasant and nice and friendly and happy and warm. Like, she's pairing this, like...
Well, she's an outsider.
Yeah.
She's not bogged down by courtly etiquette.
Yeah, it's a different vibe.
And I imagine everyone at Versailles, aside from smelling a little bad, like everyone's a little bit crusty. If you've watched, I keep pulling you to like different TV shows about royalty, but some just show it really well. The HBO Catherine the Great series, I think, does a really good job of showing you how people would have looked, how they would have done their makeup. And everyone's just like a little crusty, a little pale. The clothes they're really gorgeous, but like they've been using them for a long time. They're a little bit ratty and a little bit stained. And Jean comes in, she smells like roses because she bathes in rose water 3 times a week. She's clean, she's fresh, she's not caking her face with lead paint and rouge. And there was the trend at Versailles for a while to put moles all over your face, and what they were shaped like and where they were placed had different meanings. She's not doing that. She's an outsider. She's not bogged down by all of this. She is literally a breath of fresh air.
Literally. The
literally.
smells.
Yes.
So she stays with Du Barry because he's like, I can't just bring her to Versailles because the same thing will happen where it's like, well, we have to like groom her. We have to like
Yes.
train her into how to like until it's like the exact right moment to introduce her. And so can you explain how this happens?
Yeah, there's a couple different stories here about how Jean gets introduced first to Versailles, the society, the court, and then to the king. There's one story that says the king's valet and somebody who was involved in picking out women for him to sleep with, a man named Labelle, tried her out, meaning he slept with her. Du Barry maybe told him like, hey, come try this girl out. She's awesome. She's really hot. And then Labelle in turn reported back to the king and said, hey, you got to try this girl out. That's the kind of like very unromantic version of this story. Another story says that Jean was at Versailles. It was open to the public if you could dress the part in the crowd of people, and the king passed by and he was just so taken with her. He happened to see her in the crowd. And again, she sticks out like a sore thumb because she's so gorgeous. And I presume that the heavens opened up and a ray of sunshine fell on her and angels started singing and the king sees her and just has to know her. Again, very romantic version of the story. Most likely, I think the truth is somewhere in the middle where Du Barry is orchestrating her to be in the right place at the right time. The meeting between Du Barry and the king, or at least the first look, is probably very orchestrated. It's meant to seem casual so that the king will be attracted to her and think it's his idea. But Du Barry is not welcome at court himself, so he has to like do this kind of sneaky roundabout method of getting Jean in, is what it seems like. I don't know which version you believe is closer to the truth.
I like the version that he just sort of, because it feels so much like in high school or something where it's like, okay, I'm going to be waiting outside the gym when the guy I like, his gym class just lets out, and then I'll drop my pencil. And, it's like, I like thinking of that sort of like, we're just going to do this and this and this. But it also like, it was planned. But I do think it's also possible that you could just put Jean in a crowd and the king would notice her because everybody always does.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But he sees her, however this happens, and it's on. But he can't make her the official mistress because she's not married.
Right. Yeah. It seems like Louis XV also didn't understand the world that Jean came from. He knew she wasn't married. He knew she wasn't titled. But there's a story that he told one of his ministers, the Duc de Richelieu, that he was delighted with her, presumably after he's, been talking to her and has slept with her a couple times. He says, I'm delighted with your Jean. She's the only woman in France that has managed to make me forget I'm 60. And he also tells, I think it's his valet, that Jean has helped him discover pleasures entirely new to the king. He's never been with a woman like this before. And the valet tells him, well, Your Highness, that's because you've never been to a brothel. And it's painted in the history books like that there's this awakening that the king didn't know she was a courtesan or a prostitute in some versions of the story. And the king is, instead of being put off from Jean, because everybody around him knows that Jean is good for a fling, but like not official mistress material because of her low status, because of her, impoverished background. She's not mistress material. She just isn't. And instead of the king hearing that she is a courtesan or maybe a prostitute and instantly, being done with her, he says, okay, well, we have to fix that. And we have to get her husband and introduce her to court life. So that is completely the opposite of his minister's intent in telling the king about her background. But yeah, in order to be introduced at Versailles, you had to be first, I think, married, and your family had to be noble and able to demonstrate an aristocratic background back to, I think it was 1400, which a lot of people fudged the records, I will say, but you had to at least be able to keep up appearances. And for women to be presented at court, you had to be almost like sponsored. Like what we see in Bridgerton, where there's this big court presentation, and usually it's a girl's mother presenting them in that position. But in Versailles, you had to be sponsored by a noble woman who was also at court. So that's another hurdle that we have to get over with John. She is not only unmarried, she is also completely an outsider. Nobody at court wants to associate with her because they know all of their friends would never talk to them again because, like, who are you bringing into our circle? What is this? What are you doing?
So the first obstacle, the Roue puts together these like fake family trees, claiming that she has connections to nobility. And this is where they sort of benefit from the way that her hot grandfather had like changed his last name a few times. So they're just kind of be like, yeah, they're connected to this family and this family. Her hot monk father attended as her quote uncle. Oh, and the wedding, sorry, I should say, was to Du Barry's younger unmarried brother, who literally they got married at 5 a.m. And when the service was over, they parted and never saw each other again, basically. But she was now technically married.
Yeah, the Comte du Barry, he produces his impoverished brother Guillaume. Like you said, he pastes together this family tree. He like fabricates links to, I think it's the Italian Barry or Bari family.
And also to the Italian Barrymore family.
Yeah, and like this Irish noble family. So it's just this hodgepodge of anybody whose name sounds similar to Du Barry. And yes, the wedding between Jean and Le Rouet's brother takes place, yeah, you said at 5 a.m. They meet at the altar, and right afterwards, he is given a bag of cash. They award him a pension for life, and the book I read said he was given a horse to ride away on. And who knows if they ever even like had a conversation. But Jeanne, she's now a comtesse. She's a countess. She can be presented at court, no problem, as long as a noblewoman is willing to vouch for her. And so there's like a funny story there too.
But this is also where she gets the Du Barry.
Yes,
she becomes Du Barry at this point. Yeah.
Madame du Barry, which is how she will be known in history. Yeah, the marriage will come back to bite her eventually, even though she and her husband never lived together. He goes off and lives in exile. He will pop up occasionally, though. And there is a story that eventually Louis considers actually marrying Jeanne. He wants to marry her and make her his wife because his own wife has passed away. This is in like 1773. And suddenly someone remembers like, oh, wait, she's married. Like even Jeanne, it seems, forgot that she was married. Her husband's off probably drinking somewhere. And apparently, I think he hears about this and he like threatens to show up at Versailles and cause a huge scene unless the king pays him off once again. So he essentially blackmails the king. He gives him an order of merit, which is very funny. Like he gives him a knighthood basically and says like, is that enough? Will that tide you over? So yeah, Du Barry threatens to come to court, but I don't think he ever actually does.
And then please tell the story of how she was presented at court.
Yeah, it's one of the funnier ones because it just shows you, again, the influence of the king. And if he wants to get this stuff done, he will. Okay, yes. So in order to join the court of Versailles, which you have to do in order to become the official mistress and not just the petite mistress, you have to be presented by a noblewoman in like this ceremony in front of all these other courtiers to welcome you into the fold. The problem is that no noblewoman in good standing would be caught dead. This is what Eleanor Herman calls, quote, facilitating the prostitute's intrusion into their privileged sphere. So there really is this connotation that Du Barry is a common streetwalker, like you said earlier. Not true, but the king, I think he knows this. I think he knows what is being said about his new favorite, and he doesn't care. He asks around. He finds one woman, just one, at Versailles who is willing to sponsor Du Barry in exchange for, of course, all of her debts being cleared. Her sons got promoted in the military. So like there's a lot riding on this for this woman. She agrees. All of that goes ahead. But on the day that the ceremony is supposed to happen, she gets cold feet. And she's like, you know what? Honestly, I know that like I'm making a fortune off of this, but the risk to my reputation is so bad. She fakes a sprained ankle. She fakes an injury to get out of the ceremony. Some people think she actually injured herself and the ceremony gets canceled. Joke's on her, though. The king will not let up. He insists that the ceremony is rescheduled, and this noblewoman has to keep up her end of the bargain. And she does present Du Barry to a house full of courtiers. Everyone's there hoping that she's going to, like, I don't know, fall on her face or something. Or they're just hoping to get a glimpse of this spectacular, beautiful woman and see the heavens open and the sun shine down on her. Yeah, so the presentation ceremony happens. Du Barry comes in a little bit late, so she's not like punctual, but when she did arrive, quote, even her most bitter enemies gasped at her beauty. This might also have been because she was wearing a gown of cloth of silver and gold, which is literally gold and silver woven into thread. And it's reported that she was wearing diamonds worth 100,000 livres at this time. So she might have just been very, very sparkly.
And then part of what she did, she was sparkly and the sun was shining down on her, as it always did. But then she had to make 3 curtsies.
Yes.
And then had to do 3 backwards curtsies, which required, she has to like push her big dress out of the way. Like ladies would often topple and fall over, but she had practiced this, thousands of times, I'm sure. And she killed it. She was now part of society. Yeah.
Yeah. So she becomes official mistress. She's kind of installed at court. She has a 14-room apartment above the king's. There is a staircase leading directly into his bedchamber. So if you want to talk about access, like that is the best you can possibly get. The actual queen, at this time, the queen has died. I always mispronounce her name. Marie Antoinette, I think is how you say it. She was Polish. She's passed away the year before. But at Versailles, the queen has her own, multi-room apartment, but it's on clear the other side of the palace from the king's. They occupy like the east and west wing, or the north and south wing, basically. So not even the queen has this level of access to the king, her husband. Du Barry is now right above him and can walk down and ask for a favor whenever she wants. So, people start to show up at her rooms, despite the fact that she has all these enemies at court. People are coming to her for favors, and also just to like look at her because she's so stinking beautiful.
And I want to mention also that 15, he sells off Deer Park. So he's all in on Jeanne.
We're done. He's a one-woman man. Yeah. Yeah, like I mentioned, he toyed with the idea of marrying her in the 1770s. He's so taken with her. He loves her so much, probably because she makes him feel young, and she's so beautiful. But yeah, he gets this like sense of youth and vigor again. He's like pushing 60 when he meets her, and well into his 60s now. He is like instilled with this renewed sense of like, hey, I'm alive.
It's a cliffhanger. I'm going to leave you there for now. Next week, we're going to have Amanda back again to tell the second part of the saga of Madame Du Barry. And I do want to mention that some of you may be very familiar with Amanda's work, and some of you maybe want to follow her for the first time. And so she's doing her royal commentary stuff on TikTok and also on Instagram at Matta_of_fact. So MATTA _of_fact, because her last name is Matta. And that's where you can find her there to follow her videos and things. And then she also has a podcast called Art of History, which you can find wherever you're listening to podcasts. Wherever you're listening to this right now, look up Art of History. And that is a amazing podcast that she does where she uses her art history background to look at a painting, historical painting, and then kind of just tell the story of how it came to be and what it represents and things like that. And you might be like, well, a podcast about art? And you know what? It's amazing. And she pulls it off. So look for her podcast. And then she also has a Substack, which I think is also a matter of fact on Substack. But I'll put all the links to all of her things in the show notes below this episode. As well, you can follow me in various places. More specifically, you can follow me. I have a newsletter on Substack, which is just at vulgarhistory.substack.com. I'm doing every other week posting an essay there about difficult women from history, quote unquote. I started with Cleopatra, a story that you know from this podcast, perhaps, but also we're just kind of moving into just different women who have had that reputation. throughout history. You can also support this podcast on Patreon, patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter. And so you can join there for free just to keep up with what I'm doing. I post stuff there like my travel blogs from my recent trip to England and Scotland and Germany. All of those are there and they're available to all members at the free level. And if you pledge $1 or more a month, you get early ad-free access to all episodes of this podcast. And for $5 or more a month, you also get bonus episodes of things like Vulgar Piece Theater, which is where I talk with friends of the podcast, Alison Epstein and Lanawa Johnson, about costume dramas. We have not yet done the Sofia Coppola Marie Antoinette film. I feel like we might need to save that for like when we get to Marie Antoinette in this series, but there's a huge archive of those episodes on there that you can hear. And then also there'll be new episodes coming up soon. As well, if you join at the $5 a month level, you get to join. We have a Discord where we just like chat. It's just like the Tits Out Brigade. It's called the Vulgar History Salon. And it's just a place to I put spoilers there sometimes about stuff that's coming up on the podcast. We share pictures of our pets. It's a nice time. Anyway, you can get all those things at various levels at patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter. And you can also follow this podcast on Instagram and also on Threads at Vulgar History Pod. And if you want to get some merchandise, including our new Varsity design by Karen Moynihan, the merchandise is available if you go to vulgarhistory.com/store. That takes you to the TeePublic store, which is great for Americans. If you're outside the US, go to vulgarhistory.redbubble.com. That's got better shipping for people not in the US. And I mentioned the Varsity design. So I got this silly review on Apple Podcasts where somebody said that this podcast is not for people who take history seriously. And I was like, it's not, because history is full of a lot of goofballs doing silly things. And why should we pretend like they were all amazing geniuses? So basically, the new design, it says Vulgar History in kind of a collegiate font, like you might see a university's name. And then it says not taking history seriously since 2019, because that is when this podcast started. We're coming up on the 5-year anniversary. So I hope to have something special planned for that anniversary coming up. But for now, enjoy that and other merch at our various merch stores. And we also have our gorgeous brand partner, who also inspired the name of my Substack series, Common Era Jewelry. They make beautiful jewelry. One of their collections is called Difficult Women. Yes, it includes Cleopatra, Agrippina, Boudica, some people that we've recently been talking about on here. Common Era Jewelry is a woman-owned small business, and they make beautiful jewelry inspired by women from history and also women from mythology. And you can get them in necklaces, you can get them in rings. The pieces are available in solid gold as well as in more affordable gold vermeil. And if you're interested in purchasing pieces from them, Vulgar History listeners always get 15% off all items from Common Era if you go to commonera.com/vulgar or use code VULGAR at checkout. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can. My DMs are open on Instagram at Vulgar History Pod, or you can also message me. If you go to vulgarhistory.com, my website, there's a little email me contact link, and you can do that too. And anyway, next week, we're going to get into Madame du Barry Part 2, French Revolution happens. We'll see how she fares there. But until next time, keep your pants on and your tits out. Vulgar History is researched, written, and hosted by Ann Foster. That's me. The editor is Christina Lumagi. Theme music is by the Severn Duo. The Vulgar History Show image is by Deborah Wong. Transcripts are written by Aveline Malik. Find transcripts of recent episodes at vulgarhistory.com.
Welcome to the small town of Chinook, where faith runs deep and secrets run deeper. In this new thriller, religion and crime collide when a gruesome murder rocks the isolated Montana community. Everyone is quick to point their fingers at a drug-addicted teenager, but local deputy Ruth Vogel isn't convinced. She suspects connections to a powerful religious group. Enter federal agent V.B. Laureau, who has been investigating a local church for possible criminal activity. The pair form an unlikely partnership to catch the killer, unearthing secrets that leave Ruth torn between her duty to the law, her religious convictions, and her very own family. But something more sinister than murder is afoot, and someone is watching Ruth.
Chinook, starring Kelly Marie Tran and Sanaa Lathan. Listen to Chinook wherever you get your podcasts.
Contained herein are the heresies of Radolf Buntwine, erstwhile monk turned traveling medical investigator. Join me as I study the secrets of the divine plagues and uncover the blasphemous truth that ours is not a loving God, and we are not its favored children. The heresies of Radolf Buntwine, wherever podcasts are available.
I'm Laura Cathcart-Robbins, and I'm the host and creator of Only One in the Room podcast. Every week, my co-host Scott Slaughter and I invite you to join us for an hour and lose yourself in someone's incredible Only One story. We talk to the realest of real people, dealing with issues like infertility, addiction, human trafficking, and body shaming. Oh, and we want to be fair, so we talk to some celebrities too. Oscar winners, New York Times bestselling authors, supermodels, and even the most decorated U.S. Winter Olympian. Everyone is invited to share their only one story with our listeners. This podcast is for anyone who has ever felt alone in a room full of people, which is to say that this podcast is for everyone. Download Only One in the Room wherever you listen to podcasts today.